Good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation to be with you this morning. I was invited to give you two wake-up calls. The first one is to wake up from the cold, and the second one is to wake up to the prospects and opportunities that Africa offers. The world clearly, and Davos demonstrates that, is undergoing an interesting economic, political, social, and demographic transition. For the last 5 to 10 years, India and China have been very much at the forefront, as have been other BRIC countries, in recognizing that unipolarity, politically and economically, is shifting to multipolarity. But that multipolarity now extends to the African continent. And in very short periods of time, it's very evident that what we are now seeing is a greater recognition in political circles, but more importantly now in business circles as well, that Africa has indeed arrived on the global stage, and that apart from being a curiosity, Africa needs to become a serious business proposition, if you like. Africa has, as you all know, 1 billion people, but at the same time, only 10% of its trade takes place within the continent itself. It has a serious infrastructure deficit, but at the same time has huge resources, both in terms of land and mineral resources, which are the envy of many other parts of the world. The new reality, which the chairperson of the IMC referred to, certainly captures some of the things that we are now beginning to discern. Firstly, that we are living in this multipolar world, and that as business and as government, we've got to recognize that many of our strategies, approaches, and paradigms need to undergo a change. Secondly, the new reality demands that both from a business and government point of view, sustainability becomes an important objective. If we engage in quick fixes and quick investment in and out, then we are not creating a sustainable economic future, both for the societies that we work in and for the globe more generally. The third element of the new reality is the importance of demographics, something that has also arrived on the stage, if you like, suddenly over the last couple of years, particularly in the last year. Certain parts of the world are getting older, and certain parts of the world are going to remain younger for some time to come. And that begins to influence business perspectives and prospects and analyses in terms of growth and demand. And certainly the African continent offers a huge young population. Part of the new reality is also a recognition that Africa has arrived at an interesting equilibrium and stability, politically speaking. Despite flashes in certain parts of the continent, and which continent doesn't have some kind of flash or the other at the moment, there's remarkable political stability and institutional development taking place on the African continent. So clearly, there's a need to begin to both acknowledge and operate in terms of that acknowledgement that there are indeed new sources of growth and demand on the African continent, and that that growth and demand could begin to both influence lives of the billion people on the continent, but also the way in which business dynamics unfold as well. At the same time as recognizing the potential, the opportunities, and the positives that the African continent offers, we need to look at our challenges and see what opportunities lie within them as well. Clearly, regional integration, which is the topic for today, is one of the most important challenges. In a few weeks' time, there'll be a meeting of 3 economic communities in, let's call it sub-Saharan Africa, in an attempt to create the basis for a free trade area amongst the 3 regional authorities and areas. And that could be the beginning of interesting platform, if you like, for regional integration in terms of infrastructure, in terms of political decision-making, but also in terms of creating the right kind of investment and growth climate. Clearly, a second challenge for ourselves is the creation of regional value chains as opposed to national value chains. One of the lessons of Asia and other parts of the world is regions work far more effectively than nation states themselves, and how we create common prosperity whilst building prosperity within a single area, which might have certain competitive advantages, is one of the things that we need to look at in the course of your discussions, but in the next year or so as well. As business, one of the imperatives, if we are to lay the basis for sustainability on the African continent, is to, whilst investing in your particular area in business, to also look at investments in education and skills development on the African continent, and innovation centers being created on the African continent as well. I believe that the kind of innovation that can come from the African continent will be far more appropriate to what Africa and many other developing countries require than the innovation that we might be getting from the developed part of the world. The infrastructure deficit will be a massive catalyst, both for economic growth, but also for magnetizing, if you like, and attracting investment into Africa as well. There's a lot of talk around this particular area. The African Union has made some major decisions in recent times in this area as well. There are serious task teams that are working at the moment, both within the South African government and elsewhere on the African continent. And sooner rather than later, I think we're going to see fascinating developments in this area. And the question is, how do we become part of that particular process? The other things that we might want to think about is how do we build public-private institutional capacity, not just in terms of the business ventures that we undertake, but in the spirit of this new reality where development has to become an important component of any growth strategy. The kind of institutions that the African continent requires, suited to its conditions, meeting its requirements, and at the same time ensuring that they're compatible with global requirements as well. One of the clear things, even from the first day of Davos, is that the age of single models which need to be imposed or implemented across the world is gone. There's more and more of a recognition that the multiplicity of models is what we've got to learn to cope with, live with, adapt to, and encourage, because that's where our ultimate success as humanity is actually going to lie. Delivering enabling infrastructure, which will be one of the topics that you discuss at your table, is also a key. And how we link, if you like, short-term decisions and infrastructure implementation with longer-term visions of where we want to go will be one of the key challenges. A third group here will be looking at unlocking regional agricultural linkages. Agriculture is going to be a great strength, as you know, of the African continent. The pity is that others are beginning to realize it from other continents before we realize it ourselves. We have probably the most arable land that is unused at the moment on the surface of the earth, and how this is capitalized in a way in which the benefits accrue not just to a small elite, but to people more generally, is part of the challenge that we need to take on. Tourism works very well in certain parts of Africa, but all of us will agree, and I'm sure you'll come up with better ideas in terms of how we maximize the tourist potential that the African continent has. Here again, the World Cup and its successful hosting by South Africa on behalf of the African continent has begun to change the perceptions of the world. And we need to build on that fairly quickly in order to capitalize on the advantages that we've gained through that process. Africa, of course, as one of the groups is going to discuss, is part of the globe. And so its relationship with other continents and other regional entities is as important as what it does itself. And building on those relationships within the global environment is a crucial challenge as we go forward. The period that we are moving into, this transition that I mentioned earlier, has huge opportunities, but it's got huge threats as well. And amongst those threats is where national interest and protectionism begins to play a more dominant role than global interest and the necessity to create a climate where all of us, regardless of the model that we are using, prosper. So Africa offers prospects for growth, for jobs, to eliminate poverty in the next 20 years, and to address the key issue as we look at investment opportunities of inequality in our societies and how we manage those. So the key words are clearly inclusive growth, which advances the interests of the African continent and its billion people as an important contribution to global growth and global development as well. Thank you.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.